Hello, everyone, and welcome to Employment Standards 101. My name's Megan Nichols, and I'm caseworker and team lead at the Workers Resource Centre. We're a charitable organization that helps Alberta workers with issues like job loss, discrimination, improper pay, illness, disability, and much more. We provide free one-on-one support to workers experiencing these sort of issues and provide them with information and support to help them navigate some really tough situations. We also provide free workshops like this one, to help workers understand their rights and empower them with information so that they know what to do and where to access support if their rights have been violated. Today's workshop is facilitated by public legal educator Kennedy Hughes. She'll be presenting key aspects on Alberta employment standards, including documentation, minimum wage, payment frequency, paycheck deductions, and overtime. Because there's so much to cover, we've broken this workshop into two parts. So if you haven't already signed up for part 2 of this workshop, which will be taking place next Tuesday, there'll be a link posted in the Q&A section. Participants are invited to ask questions in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to respond to as many as possible. I'd like to remind everybody that this is a public forum, and this workshop's being recorded and will be made public on YouTube and other social media. So we strongly discourage questions that are of a personal nature. If you have an employment-related problem that you require support with, please visit www.helpwrc.org and click the green Get Help button. At the end of this workshop, we ask that you please take about 2 minutes to fill out our feedback survey, and we'll provide you with the link for that in our Q&A section as well. Your feedback not only helps us improve, it also helps us ensure that we can continue to provide these workshops for free. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kennedy.
Thanks so much, Megan. Good evening, everyone. Like Megan said, my name is Kennedy, and I am here tonight from the Workers Resource Centre to teach everyone about Alberta employment standards. 2 important disclaimers before we begin tonight's presentation. Number 1, all of the information that we talk about tonight is current as of today, but the government can change the rules at any time. If you feel like your workplace rights have been violated, please contact the Workers Resource Centre so we can provide you with the most up-to-date information. Number 2, there is a difference between legal advice and legal information. In order for someone to give you legal advice, they had to have gone to law school. I did not go to law school. I am giving you legal information. What you do with this information is up to you, but it is not advice. We'll start tonight with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Ayex Nakota Nation, the Métis Nation, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. Did you know that it's National Indigenous History Month in Canada? You can find events near you by visiting the website linked here or by scanning this QR code. So our presentation tonight is about employment standards. What are employment standards? They are a set of provincial rules. That means they could be different in BC, they could be different in Manitoba. Tonight we are talking about Alberta's employment standards. These rules will tell you the minimum requirements that your employer has to provide to you. Minimum requirements. What that means is your employer has the option to give you more, but they can never give you less because everything we talk about tonight is the minimum. These standards apply to almost all workers in Alberta, full-time, part-time, casual, temporary. If you work in Alberta, it is likely that these rules will apply to you. But before we start talking about the actual rules, it's important to understand that 3 groups of workers do not qualify for protection under this set of rules. Those 3 groups are self-employed individuals, workers employed in federally regulated industries, and unionized workers. If you are one of these three types of workers, the rules we talk about tonight do not apply to you. Let me explain why. Self-employed individuals, also called contractors. That means you are your own boss. If you are your own boss, the province of Alberta is not responsible for your protection at work. If you are your own boss, you are responsible for your protection at work. Group number 2, workers employed in federally regulated industries. This includes things like banks, airlines, and telecommunication companies. Banks, for example, work with the Canadian dollar. The Canadian dollar has to be regulated or controlled by the entire country of Canada. That's what federally regulated means. If you work with a product that has to be controlled by the entire country, your protection at work is going to come from the Canada Labor Code, not Alberta employment standards. Finally, unionized workers. A unionized worker is anyone who works for a company that is part of a union. You will know if your company is part of a union because during your interview, the person who is interviewing you will say, "Our company is part of a union," and you will have to sign a lot of paperwork. If you want to learn more about what it means to be a unionized worker, I would recommend to go on YouTube and type in, "What is a union?" They have lots of videos on there that can explain it better than I can. Lots of different industries have unionized workers. Teachers, nurses. My job, for example, I am a unionized worker. If you work for a company that is part of a union, your protection at work comes from a document called the collective agreement. This collective agreement will just tell you all the requirements your employer has to provide to you. Because Alberta employment standards are the minimum, every collective agreement will include everything we talk about tonight. Your employer has the option to give you more, but they can never give you less because Alberta employment standards are the minimum. Something very important to note, and if we take away anything from tonight's presentation, written documentation is so important. There are lots of great employers in Alberta, but there are also lots of bad ones, and you need to protect yourself. Best way to do so? Always get written paperwork of the things that happen to you at your job. Some examples of important pieces of documentation. Number 1, your offer letter or work agreement. This will be the document you receive as soon as you start a new job. It will tell you important information like your pay rate, how much money you're making, your start date, when you start work, and your position title. You should also keep track of the hours that you go into work and any pay stubs that you receive. Pay stubs can have a lot of different names. Pay slip, pay statement. It's just a form that shows you how much money you have earned. Finally, you should keep written documentation of any changes that happen in your position and any important conversation you have with your manager. For example, let's say you and your manager have a verbal discussion and they mention you are going to receive a pay raise of $2 per hour. After you have that conversation, it is very important to send your manager a follow-up email. You can say, "During our conversation, this is what we spoke about," and you can list everything that you talked about. Having written documentation of important conversations is the best practice. Our first topic tonight is going to be minimum wage. Minimum wage is the lowest amount of money per hour that an employer can pay an employee. In 2018, the general minimum wage rose by $2 and is now at $15 per hour for anyone over the age of 18 working in Alberta. There are a few exceptions to this rule. The first exception is for students. A student is defined as a person under the age of 18 still going to school. If a student works during the school year, the first 28 hours in the week that student works only has to be paid at $13. Any additional hour in the week has to be paid at $15. So for example, if a grade 11 student wanted to work during the school year, they worked 30 hours in 1 week. The first 28 hours only has to be paid at $13, but hour 29 and hour 30 has to be paid at $15. Keep in mind, some employers might not know about this exception for students, and they may pay students $15 for every hour they work. That's completely fine. That student is lucky. This is just the lowest they are able to pay. The next exception to the minimum wage rule is for salespeople. So these are people who earn their money through commission. You sell a car, you get money because you sold that car. Salespeople have a minimum wage of $598 per week. The last exception to the minimum wage rule is for domestic employees. A domestic employee is someone who lives in their employer's house for the care, comfort, or convenience of the employer. So like a live-in nanny, a live-in caretaker. If you live in your employer's house to make your employer's life easier, you are considered a domestic employee and your minimum wage is $2,848 per month. Sometimes people think when they have worked at a company for 10 years, for example, that they should be entitled to an increase in their pay, a pay raise. Unfortunately, that is not true. The only time your employer is legally required to pay you more is if you are earning minimum wage and the government sets a new, higher minimum wage. So right now, minimum wage is $15. If you are working a job earning $15 and tomorrow government says minimum wage is $20, that is the only time your employer is required to increase your pay. What this means is you technically could work somewhere for 10 years and never receive an increase in your payment. Most of the time, this doesn't happen. Employers want to reward you for hard work, loyalty, understanding of your position, but the only time they are required to pay you more is if you are making less than the new minimum wage. We will now talk about a scenario. You work at a clothing store. 1 hour into your shift, your manager sends you home because it is not busy. You will only be paid for 1 hour. True or false? Well, if you guessed false, you are correct. Reason for this is something called the 3-hour minimum payment rule. What this rule states is if you go to work for less than 3 hours and your manager says, for any reason, you can go home, we don't need you today, you are entitled to 3 hours of payment at the minimum wage. So right now, we know minimum wage is $15. 15 multiplied by 3 is $45. If you go to work for 10 minutes and your manager says, you can go home, we don't need you today, you still get $45 worth of payment. Reason for this, you commuted to work, you were willing to do your whole shift, but for whatever reason, manager sends you home early. For your willingness, you will be paid for 3 hours at the minimum wage. But this rule does not exist if you are the person who chooses to leave early. So if you get sick or if you have a family emergency, you will only be paid for the time you are actually at work. This 3-hour minimum payment rule only exists if it is your boss who says you can leave early. Also, if you work a part-time job, you are only entitled to 2 hours of payment instead of 3 because your shifts are typically shorter in length. Now we will discuss pay schedules. There are a couple of different pay schedules that your employer can choose to pay you by. Whichever they pick, you will be paid the same, just spread out evenly. So they can pick daily. That means you get money after every work shift. They can pick weekly. Means you get money every 7 days. Biweekly payments happen every 14 days and usually on every other Friday. Not to be confused with semi-monthly. Semi-monthly payments happen 2 times a month, typically on the 15th and the 30th of every month. So those can happen on any day of the week, but it's usually the 15th and the 30th of every month. Finally, monthly. The longest an employer can wait to pay you is 1 month. With every payment you receive, you should get a document that looks something like this. This is the pay stub, pay slip, pay statement. It will show you how much money you've earned and the pay period in which you earn this money. This form will also show you any mandatory deductions. Deduction means to subtract or to take away. So a good example of a deduction will be a tax, because the government is going to take money from your paycheck to pay for taxes. This is an important piece of documentation to keep a hold of. You should save it to your personal phone or computer or print it out so you always have access to your pay statement. It is the best practice to keep your pay statements for 6 months. So if you received one today, you should keep a hold of that document for 6 months to practice the best practice. So now let's talk about getting overpaid. Let's say every single week you get $500 in your bank account. Then 1 week, the payroll people make a mistake. So you receive $600 in your account. You have been overpaid by $100. Your employer needs to let you know in writing that they are taking back that $100 overpayment. They do not need your permission. They just have to let you know in writing they are taking that money back. But they only have 6 months to do this. So if you were overpaid $100 1 year ago, that's your money now. They cannot take it back. I think we might have a question now. It is how to define a full-time or part-time staff for the 3-hour minimum payment rule. That is a good question, Patrick. To define full-time, usually in Alberta, that means you work between 35 to 40 hours per week. Part-time is usually considered about 20 hours per week. When you are hired at your new job, it will tell you in your employment contract if you are considered a full-time or a part-time staff. Let's continue. We'll talk about another scenario now. You are working as a server in a restaurant. You serve a table, but they leave before paying the bill, also called dining and dashing. You, as the server, are now responsible for paying their bill. True or false? Well, again, if you said false, you are correct. Reason for this: there are three groups of deductions or subtractions that are never allowed to be made to your paycheck. They are for uniforms, faulty work, and cash shortages or loss of property. Let's talk about each. Uniforms. Anything you are required to wear every time you go to work, your employer cannot make you pay for. For example, let's say you start a new job at McDonald's. You need the shirt that has the McDonald's logo in the corner. Your employer is not allowed to deduct money from your paycheck to pay for that uniform because you need to wear it every time you come to work. Couple of things about this rule. Number one, let's say at your job, there's no specific uniform you need to wear, but you are required to wear all black clothing. Your employer can assume you already have black clothing in your wardrobe, so they do not have to provide that for you. Number two, the rules say your employer only has to provide you with one uniform. So if you want extra uniforms, they can make you pay for those. The only exception to this rule is for PPE, personal protective equipment, steel-toed boots, hard hats, safety goggles, that type of personal protective equipment. If your employer wants to make you pay for your PPE, they are going to need your written permission. Group number two, faulty work. This covers things like accidents and mistakes. For example, you are driving your company vehicle and you get into a car crash. That's an accident. Your employer is not allowed to take money from your paycheck to pay for that car crash, even if the crash was your fault. Another example, you're working as a server again, carrying a big tray of dishes. You trip, you fall, all the dishes break on the ground. That's a mistake you made. Your employer is not allowed to deduct money from your paycheck to pay for those broken dishes. They can give you a different consequence, like a formal warning, or even firing you if the mistake is big enough, but they are never allowed to pay you less because you made a mistake. Final group, cash shortages or loss of property. This relates to the previous scenario where the server was going to be responsible for the unpaid bill. Because those people ate the food and left without paying, it counts as a cash shortage or a loss of property for the restaurant, for the company. So the individual worker is not responsible for paying for that unpaid bill. Another example, you work at a gas station. Someone comes in and robs the entire store, takes everything without paying. That counts as a cash shortage or a loss of property for the gas station, for the company. So the individual worker is not responsible for paying for all of that stolen merchandise. Are there any questions about the three groups of deductions never allowed to be made to your paycheck?
Hey, Kennedy. We have Melanie asking, what if we're hourly, but we also get paid commission, cash shortage and loss of property?
Good question. I don't think I understand fully. So are we saying if you get paid hourly, also on top of commission, are you asking about if they're allowed to deduct for cash shortage or loss of property? If that is your question, they are not allowed to do so. Even if you are hourly and get commission, if somebody steals from your job or there is a cash shortage, they are still not allowed to deduct from your payment. Any other questions? Okay, let's continue. Our next topic is going to be hours of work and break. In that middle box, we can see 12 hours is the longest shift you can be scheduled for in most industries. There are some industries that have exceptions where you can have a longer shift, but for the most part, in Alberta, 12 hours is the longest shift you can be scheduled for. Now we will talk about breaks. If your shift is 5 hours in length or shorter, your company does not need to give you a break. But this is employment standards, means it's the minimum. Your company can always choose to give you a break if your shift is 5 hours or less. They just are not legally required to. Then, if your shift is between 5 and 10 hours in length, you get one 30-minute break. If your shift is 10 hours or longer, you then get 1 hour break. These breaks can either be paid or unpaid. That is the choice of your employer. But if there are any restrictions put on your break, then it is required to be paid. So for example, if you were working as a receptionist and during your lunch break, your manager tells you, you have to stay at the front desk and answer any phone calls that come in. That counts as a restriction because you are not allowed to leave the area. That means your employer would be required to pay you for your lunch break. But if you're able to get up, go on a walk, do whatever you want with your break time, then your employer has the choice if that break is paid or unpaid. Next, you are entitled to an 8-hour period of notice before your shift time changes. What does that mean? Let's say this entire week you are working the morning shift. Next week, your manager wants you to go to the afternoon shift. They have to give you 8 hours of notice before they change you from the morning shift to the afternoon shift. The last rule in this section is for people who do not have typical weekends. Retail, restaurant, childcare. These are some examples of types of jobs where they may not have typical days of rest and when this rule will apply. If you work 2 weeks of work, that is 14 days in a row with no days off. You are entitled to 2 days of rest at the end of that. If you work 3 weeks of work, that is 21 days in a row without a day off, you are then entitled to 3 days of rest at the end of that. Finally, if you work 24 long days of work in a row without a day off, you are entitled to 4 days of rest at the end of that. It may seem like a low amount of rest days. I agree. Remember, this is the minimum. Your company can always choose to provide you with more. This is the lowest they are required to give. Our first topic tonight will be on overtime, or OT. Your overtime pay is equal to your regular pay multiplied by 1.5. So if you are earning $15 an hour regularly, 15 multiplied by 1.5 is $22.50. $22.50 is what your overtime pay would be. But not every industry has to pay overtime wages. There are some industries that are exempt or do not have to pay overtime wages. These are professional industries. Lawyers, doctors, dentists, people like that are not entitled to overtime pay. So, how many hours do you have to work before you receive this overtime pay? For most full-time jobs in Alberta, that is 8 hours per day or 44 hours per week. 8 hours per day or 44 hours per week, whichever is more. When you start a new job, it is important to read your employment contract or your offer letter. That document will tell you how long your normal shift length is meant to be. For most full-time jobs in Alberta, that will be 8 hours per day. What that means is any time you spend at work after this 8 hours is when your employer would have to give you your overtime pay. But not every job has an 8-hour shift. Some jobs have longer shifts. If we look at ambulance attendants in the top here, their daily hours before overtime wage is calculated is 10, whereas other industries is only 8. Their weekly hours before overtime is calculated is 60, whereas others are only 44. So these are just some examples of types of jobs where they have longer shifts, so they need to work more hours before they're entitled to that overtime pay. Now, there is 2 ways your employer can choose to compensate you for working an overtime hour. The first, and the easiest to understand, is they pay you your overtime wage for any overtime hour you work. The second, a little more difficult to understand, is they can give you time off of work with pay in exchange for working an overtime hour. This time off can also be called banked time or flex time. So what that means is, let's say you work 9 hours today. That's 1 hour of overtime. Your 1 hour of overtime comes up into your pretend bank. That's why it's called banked time. Any overtime you work comes into this bank. You can then use any hours in this bank for paid time off of work on another day. So if you worked 8 hours of overtime, you had 8 hours in this bank, you can get an entire day off of work with pay. The most common question I get about overtime is, when I have hours in this bank, how quickly do I need to use them for paid time off on another day? According to employment standards, which are the provincial rules, you have 6 months to use any hours in this bank for paid time off. But your employer might have a different policy. They might say you only have until the next pay period to use the hours in this bank. So again, when you start your new job, make sure you read that employment contract or offer letter, especially the overtime section, so you can learn if your overtime will be compensated with money or with time off, and you can learn how quickly you need to use your bank time in order to receive paid time off. We'll now talk about a scenario. If you leave your job, your company can keep the vacation pay that you did not use. True or false? If you think it's true, you could maybe use the raise hand function of Microsoft Teams. Well, if you thought this was false, you are correct. Let's talk about vacation. Your employer is allowed to deny your vacation request. What that means is you could submit a request for vacation, and if it does not come at a convenient time for your employer, they are able to deny that request. It is important to have a conversation with your manager to find a time that works for both you and them for you to take your vacation. Like our scenario said, if you leave your job and you have unused vacation pay, your company has to give you all of your unused vacation pay when you leave your job. Now let's talk about entitlement. In your first year of work, unfortunately, you have no entitlement to vacation. But this is employment standards, means it is the minimum requirements. So your company can always choose to give you vacation in the first year. They just are not required by the law. Then, if you worked for your company for 2 to 4 years, you are entitled to 2 weeks of vacation or an additional 4% of your wages. I'll explain that in 1 second. If you have worked at your company for 5 years or longer, you then are entitled to 3 weeks of vacation or an additional 6% of your wages. For me to explain this, let's pretend we worked at a company for 3 years. We fall into this box, we get 2 weeks of vacation or additional 4% of our wages. Your employer gets to choose if your vacation is paid or prepaid. Let's say our employer has chosen prepaid vacation. Prepaid vacation means you get your money for your vacation during the year. So up here in this top box, well, we go on the 2-week vacation we are entitled to. We do not receive regular pay because we are on vacation. We also do not receive any vacation pay because our employer chose prepaid vacation. What that means is, on every paycheck for the entire year while we are working, the employer has to give us our paycheck plus extra 4% of our wages. So over here in this side box, while we're working, let's determine our pretend paycheck. We work 80 hours in 2 weeks at $20 per hour. That means our paycheck is $1,600. Because the employer chose prepaid vacation and we do not get any money while we are on vacation, they are required to give us additional 4% of our wages on every single paycheck. So you take your paycheck, multiply it by 4%, that gives you $64 in vacation pay. Take your paycheck plus the 4% in vacation pay. This means on every paycheck for the entire year while you are working, you will receive $1,664. If your employer has chosen prepaid vacation, they expect you to save this $64 on every paycheck. Then, when you go on your vacation, that's when you're supposed to use the money you've saved throughout the year. But what if your employer has chosen paid vacation? Paid vacation means you get your money for your vacation during your vacation. So up here in the top box, well, we go on the 2-week vacation we are entitled to. We do not receive regular pay, but we do get $1,600 in vacation pay. Because we get this money during our vacation, the employer does not need to give us additional 4% on every single paycheck. So while we're working, we just receive $1,600. So in Alberta, construction workers have different rules. They are not allowed to take vacation days. So to make up for that, every construction worker gets additional 6% of their wages for vacation pay. Construction companies can choose to pay this extra vacation on every single paycheck, or they can wait until the end of the year and pay lump sum for the entire year of vacation on the very last paycheck. So, who is considered a construction worker? Lots of different jobs. In order to be considered a construction worker, you have to work at the site of and in the construction, building, repair, painting of anything listed here. So railways, pipelines, power lines, a lot of different jobs are considered construction workers. Because their rules are so different, that's why we talk about it in this presentation. It is important to note, you are only considered a construction worker if you are doing a physical or manual labor position. So if you are a receptionist for a construction company, these special rules do not apply to you. You have to be doing physical or manual labor in order to be considered a construction worker. Our next topic tonight will be general holidays. There are 9 general holidays in Alberta that every employer is required to recognize. These 9 holidays are New Year's Day, Family Day, Good Friday, Victoria Day, Canada Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Remembrance Day, and Christmas Day. These are the 9 general holidays every employer is required to recognize. But if you look at this list of holidays, these are very westernized holidays. So of course, it is not every holiday every Albertan will celebrate. There are also optional holidays. These are some examples of optional holidays where your employer has the choice if they want to recognize these special days as holidays and if they want to pay you more for working on these optional holidays. Now, there are 3 guidelines employees need to follow if they want to be paid for the holiday. Number 1, you have had to work 30 times at the same job in the previous year. You need 30 shifts to get holiday pay. So if you start a new job and you only work 20 times and then the holiday comes up, your employer does not need to give you holiday pay. You need to work 30 times to receive holiday pay. Number 2, you have to work your scheduled shifts before and after the holiday in order to receive holiday pay. Any shifts you are scheduled to work before and after the holiday, you have to work them in order to get holiday pay. Finally, the 5 of 9 rule. The 5 of 9 rule is used to help people determine what a regular day of work is for them if they work a different schedule every single week. So me, for example, I will never have to use the 5 of 9 rule because my regular days of work are the same every single week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But not everyone has that schedule. So they can use this 5 of 9 rule to help them determine what a regular day of work is for them. Let me explain. Let's say the holiday falls on this date, June 19th. On this calendar, we can see it's a Monday. You count back 9 weeks from where the holiday falls. Let's pretend these green boxes represent shifts we have actually worked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So since the holiday Monday, the previous 9 Mondays, we worked 5 of them. 5 of 9 rule. That means this holiday Monday is considered a regular day of work for us. But what would happen if you only worked 4 out of the previous 9 Mondays? If you only worked 4 of the previous 9 Mondays, then this holiday Monday is not considered a regular day of work for you. Why is that important to understand? Because you get paid differently based on if the holiday falls on a regular day of work or not. So let's say you do that 5 of 9 rule and you determine you worked at least 5 of the previous 9 Mondays. That means holiday Monday is considered regular day of work for you. And even though it's a holiday, you have to go in and work. In this case, you will be paid your average daily wage, what you would normally make. Let's say you normally work for $15 and your shift is 8 hours long. That means your average daily wage is $120. In addition to that, because you are working on the holiday, you will also receive your overtime wage for any hours you work on that holiday. So $22.50 would be your overtime wage. Let's say you work 8 hours on the holiday. That's an extra $180. Add these two together. And if the holiday falls on a regular day of work and you go to work, you could be entitled to be paid $300. That's a lot of money. Some employers might say, I don't want to pay that. So they have a second option. They could also give you your average daily wage and a day off in the future with pay. So your employer has two choices. If the holiday falls on a regular day of work and you go to work, they can give you your average daily wage and a day off with pay, or average daily wage and overtime wage for any hours you work on the holiday. Now, what happens if the holiday falls on a regular day of work, but because it's a holiday, you are not required to work? In this case, you only receive your average daily wage. Still pretty good for not having to work on those 9 general holidays. Now, what happens if you do the 5 of 9 rule, but you only worked 4 of the previous 9 Mondays? That means holiday Monday is not considered a regular day of work for you. But it's the holidays. It's really busy. Your manager asks you to come in and work. Because it is not a regular day of work for you, you're working for longer than your schedule. So you will receive your overtime wage for any hours you work on this holiday. $22.50 is your overtime wage. Let's say you work 8 hours on the holiday. That's $180 if the holiday is not a regular day of work, but you are required to work. Finally, what if the holiday is not a regular day of work and you are not required to work? This is the only time you are not eligible for any payment on those 9 general holidays. This is unnecessarily complicated. It is your employer's responsibility to do all of these calculations for you. I just wanted to give some background information so you can make sure these calculations are done correctly. Are there any questions about holiday or holiday pay?
So Fiona had a question wondering, does it matter how long your first 30 shifts are to qualify you for holiday pay?
Good question. No, it does not. As if you are there for a training shift or if you only go in for 2 hours, you just have to have 30 shifts to get holiday pay. We know construction workers have different rules in Alberta. They're not allowed to take vacation days, but they're also not allowed to not work on holidays. So to make up for that, every construction worker gets additional 3.6% of their wages for holiday pay. Again, these construction companies can pay the extra holiday on every paycheck, or they can wait until the end of the year and pay lump sum for the whole year of holiday on the very last paycheck. So if you think about it, construction workers receive 6% for vacation and 3.6% for holiday. Combine that, every construction worker receives an additional 9.6% of their wages for vacation and holiday because they are not allowed to take those days off. We'll talk about another scenario now. You get very sick and need time off of work. You apply for a job protected leave for your illness. After 2 weeks, your boss fires you. Is this allowed? So if you said no, you are correct. Our next topic is about job protected leaves. Very important. The purpose of job protected leaves is to make sure you have a job to return to after your time off. Like the scenario just said, let's say you get very, very sick. You need 10 weeks off of work. Most companies are not going to hold your position for 10 weeks while you recover. They're going to find someone who's healthy to do your work. So if you get very, very sick, you need to go on a job protected leave. Then, once you recover and you're able to return to work, you will receive same or similar job and same or higher pay. That's why it's called a job protected leave. The job you left will be protected for you to return to. Same or similar job, same or higher pay. In order to access any of these 13 job protected leaves, you are going to have to be out of your probationary period at work. Probationary periods are like trial runs for both you and your employer to determine if you'll be a good fit in the position. Probationary periods are typically 3 months or 90 days long. So you have to work for your company for 91 days before you can take any of these leaves. Next, most important fact, all of these leaves are unpaid leaves. Unpaid leaves. The purpose is for you to have a job to return to, not to pay you during your time off. If you need financial support during the time you are not working, you have to apply for employment insurance, EI. If you need help applying for employment insurance, you can contact the Workers Resource Center for free support. Next, you are considered continuously employed while you are on one of these leaves. Let's say you work for your company for 8 months. Then you need to take a leave of 2 months. 8 plus 2 is 10. You have technically worked at your company for 10 months, even though you've been on leave for 2 months. Finally, you have to give as much notice as possible to your employer when you plan on taking one of these leaves and when you plan on returning to work. So let's talk about them. The first one available to you is family and personal responsibility leave. You are entitled to 5 days per year for family and personal responsibility leave. Let's say, for example, your child's daycare has an outbreak of lice. They need to shut down for a couple of days. You need to provide care to your child. You go to your boss, you say, I am taking my 5 days of family and personal responsibility leave. You then get 5 days off of work, unpaid, to care for your child. When you return to your job, same or similar job, same or higher pay, and your boss cannot retaliate against you in any way. You cannot be treated differently. You cannot get in trouble. You cannot be fired for accessing your 5 days of family and personal responsibility leave. Next one, maternity, exclusive for pregnant people. You must be pregnant to go on maternity leave. It is available for 16 weeks of leave. Please remember, unpaid 16 weeks of leave. Purpose is for mother to have a job to return to after they give birth, not to pay them during their time off. They will need to apply for maternity employment insurance to have some financial support during this 16 weeks of time they are not working. The next leave is called parental. This is available to anyone parenting a child under the age of 18 years old, biological or adopted. It is available for 62 weeks of leave. That does not mean each parent receives 62 weeks of leave. The two parents have to split the 62 weeks, unless you are a single parent, or if your partner does not want to take any leave, then you can have the entire thing. The next one is critical illness or injury of your child. Critical illness or injury means it is life-threatening or very severe. So you cannot take this if your child has a cold. Needs to be something more intense than that. It is available for 36 weeks if you're caring for your child. It is only available for 16 weeks if there is an adult in your family who is very sick or injured and needs your support. Both of these leaves include mental illness. So if your family member is experiencing a mental health crisis, you have access to time off of work to support that person. The next one is called bereavement. This is available to you if you are grieving the passing away of a loved one. Unfortunately, we are only entitled to 3 days of bereavement leave for the entire year. Doesn't matter how many people that you lose. Bottom one on this page is called compassionate care. Compassionate care is available to you if someone in your family has been medically diagnosed as only having 6 months left to live, and you are providing end-of-life care for that person. It's available for 27 weeks, which is equal to 6 months. Unfortunately, if the person passes away during that time, the leave will end. The next one is reservist or military job protected leaves. This is the only job protected leave where there is no time frame. The military can take you for as long as they need you. So you could be gone with the military for 5 years. When you return to your job, same or similar job, same or higher pay, and your boss cannot fire you because you were on military job protected leave. The next one is domestic violence. Domestic violence is available for anyone fleeing the negative effects of domestic violence. You are entitled to 10 days of leave per year. Next, we have long-term illness or injury to yourself. This includes your own mental illness. This is available for 16 weeks of leave. I know I said this a lot, but please remember, unpaid 16 weeks of leave. The purpose is for you to have a job to return to once you recover. You need to file for medical or sickness employment insurance to have some money during these 16 weeks you are not working. The next two are incredibly sad. the disappearance or death of your child due to a probable crime. If your child is kidnapped, you are entitled to 52 weeks of leave. If your child is killed because of that kidnapping, you are entitled to 104 weeks of leave. Finally, citizenship ceremony leave. This is for newcomers to Canada to celebrate becoming Canadian citizens. Because you can only become a Canadian citizen one time in your life, they only give you half of 1 day for your entire working career. Our final topic tonight is about termination. There are two ways this can happen in Alberta, either with or without cause. If you are fired with cause, that means your actions, your behavior caused the decision. You are fired for stealing. If you are fired without cause, that means you did nothing wrong, but the company still has to make the decision to fire you. Let me explain further. Again, if you are fired with cause, that means your actions, your behavior caused the decision. You stole from your job and you were late every single day. If you are fired because of your behavior, your employer is going to tell you the reason why you are fired for stealing. They will also bring the proper documentation or proof to show you did what they are accusing you of. If you are fired with cause because of your behavior, you are not able to receive employment insurance. If you are fired because of your actions, you will not receive financial support from the government of Canada. Also, if you are fired with cause, your employer does not need to give you a notice period. They want it to happen immediately. You are fired today for stealing. But in Alberta, the most common way people are fired from their jobs is without cause. If you are fired without cause, that means you did nothing wrong, but the company still has to make the decision to fire you. This could be for a lot of different reasons. Maybe they're downsizing, maybe they're restructuring, maybe the company just does not think your job is important anymore. You are being fired, but it's not because of anything you did. If you are fired without cause, your employer does not need to tell you the reason why. They can just say you are being fired. But if you are terminated without cause, I would always recommend asking your employer the reason why. This is so you can make sure it's a fair and valid reason. Most of the time, if you ask your employer the reason you are being terminated, they'll tell you. This is so they can keep a good reputation in the community and they can reduce the risk of you suing them in the future. If you are fired without cause, without it being your fault, you can receive employment insurance. If you are fired and it is not your fault, you do have access to financial support from the Canadian government. Also, if you are fired without cause, it cannot happen immediately. Your employer is required to give you a notice period. The notice period is based on how long you have worked at the company. These first 90 days, that's your probationary period. At any time in those 90 days, you can be fired and no notice is required. But as soon as you worked for your company for 91 days to 2 years, they are required to give you 1 week of notice before you are fired without cause, without it being your fault. All the way down to if you've worked at your company for 10 years or longer, you can then receive 8 weeks of notice before you're fired without cause. Sometimes your employer might not want you to work this notice period for some reason. Let's say we worked at a job for 3 years. We fall into this line and we get 2 weeks of notice before we're fired without cause. For some reason, boss doesn't want us to work these 2 weeks. They can do something called pay in lieu. That's give you 2 weeks of your salary, and then your business relationship is done with that employer. They can also say, we want you to work for 1 week and we want to pay you for 1 week. So they have lots of different options as long as the notice period is equal to how long you've worked at the company based on this chart. Do we have any termination questions?
Hi, Kennedy. Sorry, this one is about WCB. So they're wondering what if an employee came from WCB due to injury? They were cleared by a physiotherapist, not given schedule for 2 weeks, and then terminated with 2 weeks of pay in lieu of notice after. Is that right? So, and again, if it's a personal question, something that's happened to you, you can definitely reach out to Workers Resource Center and speak with a caseworker as well, just to kind of preface that as well.
Yeah, Megan, do you maybe want to field this question?
Yeah, so for sure, I'll put my camera back on. So definitely we see a lot of these come through. So if you were on a work-related leave due to injury, and you come back and they basically don't return you to your job, is what it sounds like in this situation. It can be looked at as a possible human rights complaint, right? So depending on the situation, it may be that they terminated you unjustly, and so we would look into a human rights complaint in that sense.
Great, thanks, Megan. If we have no more questions, we will continue. We now know about all the notice your employer has to give you if they want to fire you. But what if you want to quit or resign from your job? Should you give any notice? The answer is yes. In Canada, it is considered professional courtesy and the best practice to provide 2 weeks of written notice when you plan on quitting your job. That leads us into reason number 2. You do not know what is going to happen in the future. You might need a reference letter or even another job from this employer. It is the best practice to keep your employment relationships as strong as possible. Best way to do so, provide 2 weeks of written notice when you plan on quitting your job. So, you feel your rights have been violated over anything we've talked about: overtime, vacation, deductions, whatever it may be, please contact the Workers Resource Center. Our caseworkers are very successful and experienced at helping people file employment standards complaints. That being said, you do not want our support. You want to file this type of complaint by yourself. It's easy to do online. You have to Google Alberta Employment Standards Complaint. You Google Alberta Employment Standards Complaint, and you can file this type of complaint online by yourself. You have 6 months in order to be on time if you are filing an employment standards complaint. If you are on time, they can go back 6 months for any wages or overtime that were missed being paid to you, and back up to 2 years for vacation or holiday pay that was missed being paid to you. So it's very important to get your complaint in as soon as possible so you can get all of the money that you are owed. Last thing for this presentation is an online resource. If you Google Alberta Employment Standards, you will be brought to their website. At the top, there's a search bar. You can type in unsatisfied judgments. Then you click the first link that says Registry of Employers with Unpaid Judgments. Then scroll a little bit and find the button that says Search for an Employer. This will give you an entire website of every company in Alberta who has this type of complaint listed against them. Why is this important information? Let's say you are going to start a new job at a pizza shop. You go onto this website, you see the pizza shop has 10 employment standards complaints listed against them. Maybe that's a red flag for you. Maybe you don't go and work at that pizza shop because it seems like they are not treating their employees according to the law. Cool thing about this website is if I submit the complaint, my information remains private. I did nothing wrong. Why would my information be online? Only thing this website shows you: business name, date the complaint was filed, how much money the company owes that individual. So if you go on this website and see the pizza shop owes their employees $50,000 in unpaid overtime, maybe we don't go work at that pizza shop. It seems like they are not treating their employees according to the law. So this is just a good way to double check any company you are going to work for does not have these type of complaints filed against them. And finally, the Workers Resource Center contact information. If you need any help with employment standards, or if you feel your rights have been violated, you can visit our website and click the green Get Help button for free support for anyone in Alberta. Okay, now we are going to answer some questions. Yes, these job protected leaves are all unpaid leaves unless they are otherwise stated. And for the case under human rights, related case as the WCB case, how long can the employee submit their complaints? For human rights complaints in Alberta, you have 1 year from the date that the incident happened. So for human rights, you have 1 year. For employment standards, you only have 6 months. Do we have any other questions? Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for attending our part 2 of employment standards.